The first time I met Lorraine Haskins, she walked into the gas station like the entire county had been built for her convenience. She didn't look around, didn't smile, didn't even glance at the line forming behind her. She marched straight to the counter, dropped a leather purse hard enough to rattle the candy rack, slid a set of keys across the countertop, and said, "Fill it up. Charge it to Pine Hollow Estates." I looked up from the register and smiled the same way I smiled at every customer. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have a charge account under that name." She stared at me for a second as if I'd spoken another language. Then she leaned closer. "You must be new. Actually, I've been here almost 6 years. Then you should know who I am." I laughed a little because I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. "I'm Lorraine Haskins, president of Pine Hollow Estates Homeowners Association. This station serves our community." I glanced toward the old owner, Frank, who was stocking drinks in the cooler. He gave me the slightest shake of his head. "We had no HOA account. Never had." "I'm sorry," I repeated. "I can't charge fuel without an active account." Her face changed immediately. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief, like nobody had ever told her no before. Then came the smile, the dangerous kind people wear right before they decide to make your day miserable. "Young man, you're refusing essential services to our residents." I blinked. "I'm refusing free gasoline. Call it whatever you like." She pulled out her phone. "You'll be explaining yourself to the sheriff." I actually chuckled again because I thought surely nobody called 911 over paying for gas. I was wrong. Within 15 minutes, 2 deputies rolled into the parking lot while half the morning customers stood around pretending they weren't watching. Deputy Ryan Mercer walked inside looking exhausted before the conversation even started. "Somebody called about criminal discrimination." Lorraine pointed directly at me. "This employee refuses to provide fuel to HOA members." Deputy Mercer looked at me. "Sir, she wants free gas." I held up the receipt screen. "There's no account." Frank walked over carrying the binder where every commercial account was listed. Landscaping companies, delivery fleets, county maintenance, no Pine Hollow Estates anywhere. The deputy flipped through it for maybe 30 seconds before closing it. "Ma'am, businesses aren't required to extend credit." Lorraine crossed her arms. "He's targeting our neighborhood." "Did he refuse to sell you gasoline?" the deputy asked. "No." "Did he refuse service?" "No." "Then what's the emergency?" The silence that followed was almost painful. A man pumping diesel across the lot actually laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Lorraine spun toward him with a glare that could have stripped paint. "This isn't over," she whispered before grabbing her keys and storming outside. She paid with a credit card after all, every single gallon. As she drove away, Frank sighed. "Son, that's Lorraine. Who is she exactly?" He looked out the window until her SUV disappeared. "The reason half this town walks on eggshells." I didn't understand what he meant until the next morning. When I pulled into work at 6:30, there were 12 people standing outside holding professionally printed signs. "BOYCTT, Grady Gas. Stop discrimination. Support OUR community." Somebody had even brought matching t-shirts. I thought maybe there had been an accident overnight. Then I spotted Lorraine standing in the middle of them holding a bullhorn. She smiled the second she saw my truck. "Good morning, everyone," she announced loudly. "Here comes the man who thinks our neighborhood isn't worthy of basic respect." I parked anyway. My stomach was already tightening, but I kept reminding myself I'd done nothing wrong. As I walked toward the entrance, cameras followed me. Not television cameras, cell phones. People were live streaming. Comments were scrolling across screens before I even unlocked the door. Lorraine stepped in front of me. "Would you like to apologize today?" "For what?" "For humiliating this community. I asked you to pay for gas." "Exactly." She turned dramatically toward the phones. "Did everyone hear that?" "He admits it." The crowd murmured even though nothing she'd said made any sense. I finally squeezed past her and unlocked the station. For the next 3 hours, protesters stayed outside while customers hesitated before pulling in. Some turned around. Others came inside just to ask what had happened. By lunchtime, someone showed me the neighborhood Facebook page. According to Lorraine's version of events, I'd screamed at an elderly woman, denied emergency fuel during a community crisis, insulted homeowners, and laughed while calling residents freeloaders. None of it had happened. Not one word. But thousands of people had already shared the story because outrage spreads faster than truth ever will. Around 2 that afternoon, Frank quietly placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't panic. Cameras remember better than people do." At the time, I had no idea those 8 words were about to change everything. Frank waited until closing before showing me the security system. Our little station had 8 cameras. Nothing fancy. Just enough to cover the pumps, the parking lot, the register, and both entrances. He plugged in an external drive, folded his arms, and let the footage play from the moment Lorraine had arrived the day before. Watching it back almost felt surreal because it looked nothing like the stories spreading across social media. There she was, walking in without acknowledging anyone, demanding a full tank charged to an account that didn't exist, threatening me before I'd even finished explaining the policy, then calmly paying with her own credit card after the deputies left. No insults, no raised voice from me, no discrimination. Just a woman who couldn't accept hearing the word no. Frank smiled for the first time all day. Truth isn't always louder, he said. Sometimes it's just better recorded. The next morning he called his nephew, Caleb, a local videographer who spent half his life making documentaries about small-town businesses. Caleb watched the footage 3 times before looking at us. Mind if I post this? Frank shrugged. If we're going down, we might as well go down telling the truth. By sunset, the video was online. No dramatic music, no editing tricks, just raw security footage with timestamps running across the screen. At first, nothing happened. Lorraine's supporters flooded the comments, calling it fake, claiming the footage had been edited, accusing us of hiding earlier interactions. Then someone noticed the deputy's body camera timestamps matched our security cameras. Another person pointed out that Lorraine had, in fact, pulled out her own credit card exactly when I said she did. Within 24 hours, the comments started changing. People weren't defending her anymore. They were asking uncomfortable questions. Why had the HOA president tried to charge personal gas to the association? Why had she called 911 over a decline charge account? Why did every disagreement somehow become a public spectacle? Then something unexpected happened. An older man named Harold walked into the station carrying a folder almost 2 inches thick. He bought a cup of coffee, waited until nobody else was around, then slid the folder across the counter. She did the same thing to me, he said quietly. Inside were violation letters spanning almost 5 years. Fines for leaving his trash can visible from the street for 2 hours. Fines because his mailbox had faded paint. Fines because his grandson's basketball goal stayed in the driveway during summer vacation. Thousands of dollars over tiny issues that somehow always disappeared if residents agreed to hire companies owned by Lorraine's friends. I stared at him. Why didn't anyone fight back? Harold laughed without humor. Because everyone thought they were the only one. 2 days later, another resident stopped by. Then another. A retired teacher. A widowed nurse. A young couple saving for their first baby. Every story sounded different, yet somehow exactly the same. Lorraine always started with a small rule. Then came the threats. Then public humiliation. Then legal letters nobody could afford to challenge. Before long, the counter where people normally bought lottery tickets had turned into an unofficial confession booth. Frank finally cleared off one of the cafe tables and started offering free coffee because people stayed for hours comparing letters and notices they'd hidden in kitchen drawers for years. Caleb kept filming interviews, not because we planned to make another video, but because everyone suddenly wanted their story documented. One woman actually cried halfway through describing how she'd skipped medication for a month just to pay HOA fines she later discovered had never been properly approved by the board. I remember driving home that night wondering how a disagreement over 1 tank of gasoline had somehow uncovered years of fear buried beneath perfectly trimmed lawns and freshly painted fences. Meanwhile, Lorraine wasn't slowing down. If anything, she became even louder. Every evening she live-streamed from her front porch, accusing me of launching a smear campaign against hardworking volunteers. She claimed outside agitators were attacking the neighborhood. She insisted the security footage had been manipulated using artificial intelligence. Some people still believed her. Others didn't know what to believe anymore. The division spread through Pine Hollow faster than anyone expected. Neighbors stopped waving at each other. Couples argued at dinner tables. Church parking lots became debate stages after Sunday services. Then Lorraine made the mistake that changed everything. During one of her live streams, she proudly announced the HOA had spent association money protecting residents from dangerous businesses that refused to cooperate with community leadership. Most viewers ignored the comment. One person didn't. His name was Daniel Ortiz, a CPA who had quietly served as HOA treasurer 3 years earlier before resigning. 20 minutes after Lorraine ended her live stream, Daniel emailed Caleb screenshots of financial reports showing legal expenses, consulting invoices, and public relations payments that didn't seem to match anything residents had ever approved. Caleb called us immediately. "You guys need to see this." Frank stared at the spreadsheets in silence before whispering, "Either these books are wrong, or somebody's been treating HOA dues like a personal checking account." Caleb published nothing. Instead, he handed everything to a local investigative reporter named Monica Pierce, someone with a reputation for refusing to print a single accusation she couldn't prove twice. Monica spent nearly 2 weeks digging through public records. She interviewed former board members, contractors, accountants, county clerks, even retired attorneys who had represented the HOA years before. Every phone call uncovered another loose thread. A landscaping company owned by Lorraine's brother had somehow won contracts every single year without competitive bids. A consulting firm receiving monthly payments listed the same mailing address as Lorraine's vacation property. Legal invoices had been approved during meetings that several board members later swore had never actually taken place. The story was getting bigger than any of us imagined. Then the sheriff called Frank. My stomach dropped when he answered because I honestly thought we were somehow in trouble again. Instead, Sheriff Tom Gaines asked if we'd be willing to provide copies of every security recording from the original incident. "Why?" Frank asked carefully. The sheriff paused just long enough to make my pulse race. "Because this isn't about gasoline anymore." 3 days later, county investigators quietly attended an HOA board meeting. Nobody announced who they were. They simply sat in the back taking notes while Lorraine delivered another fiery speech about protecting neighborhood values. According to one board member who later spoke anonymously, Lorraine looked nervous for the first time in years when she noticed unfamiliar faces writing everything down instead of applauding her. The following week, Monica's investigation aired on local television. She never accused Lorraine of crimes. She simply presented documents, interviews, timelines, and financial records, then ended the segment with one simple question. If these expenditures were properly authorized, why can't current board members explain them? That question echoed across the county. Suddenly, reporters started calling. State regulators requested records. Residents demanded emergency meetings. Even people who had defended Lorraine online quietly deleted old posts. Yet through all of it, she refused to admit even the smallest mistake. She doubled down, insisting she was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by a gas station clerk with a personal grudge. I couldn't help laughing the first time I heard that. Me? I was still working 48 hours a week behind the same register, cleaning coffee spills, stocking windshield washer fluid, and reminding customers pump 4 like to stop at exactly $20 unless you squeeze the handle a certain way. I didn't have time to organize conspiracies. I barely had time to eat lunch. But once people stop being afraid, something remarkable happens. They begin comparing notes. One resident brings receipts. Another finds emails. Someone else discovers meeting minutes that don't match official records. Small pieces become larger patterns, and larger patterns become stories impossible to ignore. By the time the HOA announced a special community meeting to restore confidence, nearly every folding chair in the high school gym had been claimed an hour before the doors officially opened. I remember standing outside with Frank and Caleb, looking at the line stretching across the parking lot, and Frank quietly muttered, "This all started because one woman didn't want to pay for a tank of gas." None of us knew that before the night was over. Lorraine Haskins would walk onto that stage believing she was about to silence her critics forever, and instead take the first irreversible step toward losing everything she had spent years building. By the time Lorraine Haskins stepped onto the stage that night, she was still wearing the same confident smile I'd seen at the gas station weeks earlier, the smile of someone convinced she could talk her way out of anything. Nearly every seat inside the high school gym was filled, and dozens more people stood against the walls with their phones raised, ready to record whatever happened next. Lorraine adjusted the microphone and thanked everyone for coming before launching into another speech about protecting property values, preserving community standards, and defending Pine Hollow from outside attacks. She barely made it 5 minutes before someone in the crowd interrupted. It was Harold, the retired mechanic who had first handed me that thick folder of violation letters. He stood up holding the same folder over his head. "Would you like to explain these?" he asked calmly. Lorraine dismissed him with a wave. Then another resident stood. Then another. A young mother described paying fines she never understood. A retired nurse talked about choosing between medication and HOA penalties. Former board members challenged meeting minutes that no longer matched official records. The room slowly transformed from a routine association meeting into something that felt more like a public reckoning. Lorraine kept trying to regain control, pounding the gavel again and again, but nobody was listening anymore. Then Monica Pierce walked to the front carrying a stack of certified public documents. She didn't raise her voice. She simply placed the papers on the table one by one while county investigators watched from the back of the room. Every document matched the reporting she'd already published. Every contract, every payment, every questionable expense had been verified. When one investigator finally asked Lorraine whether she wished to explain the financial discrepancies, the silence that followed lasted longer than any speech she had given that evening. For the first time since I'd met her, she genuinely looked unsure of herself. One board member quietly resigned on the spot. Another admitted he had signed documents without reading them because he trusted Lorraine completely. Within minutes, the board voted to suspend her authority pending a full investigation. And as the motion passed, the same room that had once feared her erupted into applause. I wasn't cheering. Honestly, I just stood there thinking about how absurd the whole journey had been. A single argument over paying for gasoline had somehow exposed years of intimidation that nobody believed could ever be challenged. Outside the gym, television cameras surrounded residents instead of Lorraine. People weren't talking about me anymore. They were talking about accountability, transparency, and how easily power grows when everyone assumes someone else will speak up first. Over the next several months, independent auditors reviewed the HOA's finances. New board elections were held, outdated policies were rewritten, and several questionable contracts quietly disappeared. Pine Hollow didn't become a perfect neighborhood overnight, but it became a place where people finally felt comfortable asking questions without worrying about retaliation. Life at the gas station returned to normal too. Morning commuters complained about coffee prices. Teenagers bought too many energy drinks. Truck drivers argued over football. And every now and then, someone would recognize me and laugh, asking if I was the guy who accidentally started a revolution with a gas pump. I always told them the same thing. No, she started it. I just asked for payment. Then, almost 6 months after everything had happened, a familiar SUV slowly rolled up to pump number 3. I recognized it immediately. Lorraine stepped out wearing jeans and a plain sweatshirt instead of the polished business clothes she'd always worn before. There was no crowd behind her, no live stream, no bullhorn, no sense that she expected the world to move aside when she walked in. She came to the counter carrying her credit card before I even had the chance to ask. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Finally, she looked at me and quietly said, "I should have paid for the gas that first day, and I should have gone home." I nodded because I honestly didn't know what else to say. She wasn't asking for sympathy, and I wasn't interested in revenge. She paid for her fuel, thanked me almost under her breath, and walked back outside. I watched her drive away until the SUV disappeared beyond the traffic light. And only then did I realize I wasn't angry anymore. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about winning. It had become a reminder that arrogance has a strange habit of creating its own consequences. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive because one person is especially brave. Sometimes it happens because one ordinary moment gives everyone else permission to stop being afraid. Looking back, I still find it amazing that one declined charge account uncovered years of hidden resentment inside an entire community. If Lorraine had simply pulled out her credit card that first morning without making a scene, none of it might have surfaced when it did. That's a thought I still come back to every now and then. So now I'm curious what you think. If you had been standing behind that register, would you have handled it any differently? And once the investigation uncovered everything else, do you think Lorraine deserved the chance to apologize? Or was losing her position only the beginning of what justice required? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this always spark strong opinions, and I'd genuinely like to hear where you stand. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's dealt with an HOA or any situation where power was pushed just a little too far. Until next time, thanks for listening.